You're listening to Forward Faster, bite-sized insights for entrepreneurs.
Hello and welcome to For Climate Tech's podcast, powered by Forward Faster. I'm Chris Carpenter, Marketing Community Specialist with For Climate Tech. With me today is Rich and Roland Mokuolo, founders of Partsimony, where they are making smarter supply chains and connecting innovators to manufacturers. So welcome, Rich and Roland.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Just to start us off, can you and we can start with Roland and actually just clarify for some of our viewers, if it hasn't been obvious already for those watching, they are twins. So it's a little trickier. So I'm going to start with Roland for just walking us through just your guys' background. I mean, it's very cool to be, let alone one founders, but brothers doing something like this. So we'll start with Roland. Can you kind of walk us through some of your background and how Partsimony came to be?
Yeah, sure. So Roland here, co-founder and COO of Partsimony. Background, so Rich and I were both born and raised in Nigeria. As you said, we are twins. We like to joke around with dad jokes that we both met at a 9-month incubator. And so
that's the first time hearing that.
I know, I love it. Kills every time. So born and raised in Nigeria, moved to Georgia for tail end of high school and all of college. Studied civil engineering at Georgia Tech. Rich studied mechanical, which kind of leads into where we are today. But after graduation, spent a little over 5 years doing investment banking on Wall Street, because that's what you do with an engineering degree. You just go right into finance. But like a few years ago, though, Rich and I discovered this friction, which is what led to us building Partsimony together.
My background, like Roland said, mechanical engineering, and twin fashion, went to the same schools. But, you know, I don't know if you remember the movie Flubber growing up with Robin Williams, you know, the Disney movie, The Green Blob. So yeah, watched it as a 9-year-old kid in Nigeria. And I just wanted to be an inventor from then on. So as part of our capstone design project at Georgia Tech, we're meant to create this like loading device. And basically, you know, built it out. It didn't really work for the capstone because we failed to account for the motor loading arm. But had a dream, and right before graduation had a dream of it loading and working, and built it. It actually worked. So it's crazy.
Yeah.
So
more than most can say.
Yeah, exactly. I had a dream,
like a dream about world peace, but close enough.
Exactly. I had a dream about building products. But yeah, no, built it out. It actually worked. Was able to get patents in the U.S. and in Russia. But you know, just the whole experience, and my job at that time was doing manufacturing supply strategy at GE. So starting in the aviation business, building jet engines, so Six Sigma certified. Was fortunate enough to be part of the executive leadership program, corp water staff, basically just travel the world fighting fires across like the locomotive industry, the oil and gas industry, and renewable energy. And like Roland said, you know, just the idea of like looking at how enterprises look at manufacturing supply chain strategy and how startups look at it, it's completely different, and both ways are kind of suboptimal and broken. So how Partsimony came about was really through personal frustration. It's looking at the landscape and saying, you know, the manufacturing landscape needs more intelligence in terms of how do you actually discover a manufacturer, how do you actually manage your manufacturing network, and that's how kind of Partsimony came about.
I feel like you guys, I mean, you both joke that your paths are kind of not similar or kind of varying here and there, but to me, it's like, okay, well, we have an investor mindset, and then we have like someone who loves solving problems and just inventing things. Not that, and both of you kind of are in between, and let alone your brothers. So it's like you guys already can kind of anticipate each other's thoughts. Sorry, go on, Rich.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say Roland helps keep the light on. That's for sure.
Y'all were like made to do this stuff.
Exactly.
So, and I think it's really fascinating. And just because I'm new to this space and exploring, you know, there's a clear knowledge gap between hardware startups and founders and then manufacturers. We keep finding that time and time again with our program. And so I was curious of what were some of those, and I know like, without giving too much away, what are those main like data points you all look at Partsimony when helping someone find the right manufacturer, whether it's a company that's just looking to scale or a brand new hardware startup?
Yeah. So it's a multifaceted, like, complex problem. Because just to give you some experience, so some background. So the manufacturers you use are going to differ by the life cycle. So example, if you're in a prototype phase where you're just looking to validate your engineering designs, you're going to go to like a prototype shop who are used to doing like one-off like pieces, right? So maybe like a quantity of 10, 15, whatever have you, right? And then if you're looking to do small batch production, so that's where more so QA comes like a real concern. You're going to use more so like small batch production shops to, like, they can do like 10,000 units, 1,000 units, whatever have you. Mm-hmm. And then when you're going to like mass scale, like millions of units, you're going to use like an enterprise like manufacturer that can really like a Foxconn, right? It can really scale. And the challenge is with each life cycle, you have to go through the manufacturer discovery process again and again and again, right? And just to give some context, if you do it manually, when we did it with a loader project, it took us up to 6 months just to find one manufacturer. And that manufacturer can even do everything, right? So it's a lot of word of mouth. It's a lot of pounding the pavement, a lot of phone calls. So what we do at Partsimony is we take data across 3 different pillars to basically have a more superior manufacturer discovery experience as a supply chain management experience. So the 3 pillars, the first one is looking at the data sets of hardware companies, right? So what industry segments are they in? What's their spend profile? Because that helps with negotiation leverage. We take a few other data points as well. And the second thing we do is look at the component itself, right? And when we talk about the component, so let's say it's an enclosure, let's say it's a PCB or whatever have you. What is the art of the possible to manufacture the component? And this is also going back into, let's say you're looking to do a CNC part, but could you use, let's say, additive manufacturing instead, right? That may be even more cost effective and maybe be more sustainable and more eco-friendly from a supply chain standpoint. And then the third thing we look at is the actual manufacturer core competency, right? And this is going beyond just like, hey, I'm a manufacturer. I'm a manufacturer that can do a CNC like machining. It's looking at, do you have a 6-axis CNC machine or a 3-axis? And what sizes and shapes are you really good at, right? Because again, you don't want to have like a Yelp review of like, hey, it's a 5-star manufacturer. Yeah. Because in reality, manufacturers' core competencies differ, right? So for example, a 5-star manufacturer for Apple who does iPhones is not necessarily going to be a 5-star manufacturer for people who do like Peloton bikes, right? So we basically manage those informations from those 3 pillars, where it's a hardware company, the component specifications, and a manufacturer core competency to have a more superior recommendation process.
Wow, that is like so much to consider. Like,
it's a very complex problem.
The fact that you made it happen in 6 months prior made it seem makes it sound. That doesn't sound like enough time. And I know a lot of folks can come to you all, and just be based off of your network and the different folks who you've interacted with, and your own personal experience. What do you think are some like important factors for these hardware startups or founders? I'm just focusing on the founders, obviously that's a program. Should consider when looking for contract manufacturers? And Roland, I'll start with you for this one.
Yeah, sure thing. So really, it's really down to 3 things. One is looking at the manufacturer's core competency. First and foremost, you want to make sure that they can actually do what you actually want to build, or like build what you want to create. The second one is about thinking more strategically, which is more so about making sure that you're building a dynamic supply chain infrastructure at the tier level. Again, because Rich kind of brought this up prior, where typically given like your size and where you are, it's starting out, it's just easier just to go to like a tier 1 and have them manage all of like the chaos. But you get more staying power and more intelligence being able to map out at the tier level where, who builds what and how they all kind of react with each other. And then like the third part is really around evaluating like the actual landed cost of each component, not just the manufacturing costs, like how much does like it cost to go from door to door. But I guess Rich can jump in as well.
And that was really great. One thing I'll add is a lot of people don't fully appreciate the complexity of how manufacturer tiers work. So just to dive deeper on it, when we talk about what is a tiered supply chain, so when we talk about a tier one, so these are manufacturers who do like, these are your classic CMs that you think of, like Foxconn, Sanmina, whatever have you, who do like the final assembly, test, and packaging. So they get all components together, they manufacture the actual product, they assemble everything, and they test and they ship it out to the customer. And then when you go to the tier two level, these are mostly your manufacturers who do like the individual components. So whether it's like an enclosure, like PCB, or like a BMS system, whatever have you. So they do individual components. And then so when you look at the tier three level, so these are people who do most of the raw materials. So think of like Alcoa, who do like the metals or whatever have you, that's included in the actual product. And when you look at like the supply chain, and you probably have seen this in the news where there's like a global chip shortage. Those shortages are really driven by limitations at the tier two and tier three level, whether it's raw material shortages or whether it's like a component shortage or whatever have you, right? So for example, classic for Ford, deciding, hey, we're going to switch away from building trucks because we don't have access to these chips. It's a classic case of a tier two manufacturer breakdown, right? So the more you can really understand, hey, I want to have a dual strategy where if my supplier dries up over here, I'm going to go to split supply chain capacity somewhere else. Then you become more dynamic as a business, more competitive.
Yeah, because I don't think anyone thinks about that, of just how much. And I think I'm really glad to be talking to you all just so quickly after the whole Suez Canal fiasco. It's like supply chains like run everything, and can you expand on just like some of the strengths that you get as a company and as a founder just by owning your supply chain and knowing it?
Yeah, like the major strength I would say is you get to own your own destiny. Like a lot of hardware founders really struggle to own their own destiny, meaning because a lot of hardware founders come up and they have the intelligence in terms of like building like the prototypes and the product and what the product should look like and how it should function. When it comes to actually scaling it, they're like at a loss, right? It's like they feel like they don't have a lot of negotiation leverage, which in most senses is right, because you're competing with, the SpaceX of the world, who have a really robust supply chain division or whatever have you. So as a hardware founder, how do you actually compete with like a SpaceX in terms of capacity, whatever have you? And that's where intelligence like really, really comes, like your bread and butter of understanding, okay, well, how do I find other capacities that the big boys or the big players are really not necessarily like saturating, right? So I'll give you an example, right? So right now, when the tariff wars happened, and China is necessarily not as favorable as a place of manufacturer, everyone went to Vietnam, right? And so, but the Vietnam now became very saturated. So as a hardware founder, what do you then do? And the key is you actually want to go to India. So India right now, Prime Minister Modi last year issued a $6.65 billion incentive to manufacture in India, and a lot of good manufacturing capacity that is really spurring up in India. So it's like you want to start, and companies are actually realizing this, and companies like GE and even Tesla are starting manufacturing in India now. So it's like people realize this and say, okay, how do I avoid the rat race of just like fighting with every other person? How to also build a network that can be very, very dynamic. I think it wasn't actually Tesla, it was Apple.
It was Apple, yeah.
Yeah, in India. So yeah, it's really about understanding, I may be small as a hardware founder, but I want to play like the big boys in terms of like, we call it at Partsimony like chess versus checkers, right? You want to play chess and you want to play checkers. When you're so focused on like, I want the lowest cost and lowest lead time, that's really like checkers. When you start playing chess, it's like, okay, well, I can trade off a little bit of high cost for better lead times. I can trade off, manufacturer A to manufacturer B because of, maybe the tariffs are much more favorable, or whatever have you, right? And looking at the relationship life cycle of each manufacturer. Then you start playing more so chess.
That's crazy. I think that's a perfect analogy. Yeah, and I was just thinking of like talking about dynamic and obviously all things COVID. Just being able to react and stuff like that, and just the idea of knowing the global supply chain, let alone just domestic. And I originally I was kind of thinking like, okay, so when working with domestic manufacturing, what have you noticed has changed, or at least for better or for worse, with reacting to the pandemic? But that can be global as well, because obviously everything's connected, and as we keep experiencing, there's so many global ties to our supply chains here.
Yeah, no, no. I actually like would say that there were like some good things that actually came out of this pandemic. I think the very core of it was there was a much needed mindset shift that happened. You know, prior to COVID and prior to like the trade tariff wars, um, talking to someone and telling them that, hey, you need to have a dynamic manufacturing supply chain infrastructure was, akin to more of like selling someone a vitamin versus a painkiller, right? Because to them, it's like, well, manufacturing supply chains are consolidated around one region. I typically have my relationship set up. It's worked for our company before. Why should I change, right? And so I think like the tariff wars was like the first, kind of dent in like people's realities. And then we're now moving into a paradigm where the new certainty is uncertainty, right? So you can have, trade wars, you could have global pandemics, you could have like,
Suez Canal.
yeah, exactly, like the Suez Canal. But like the key then becomes, well, how do you create that infrastructure to be more dynamic? And most people are more familiar with like the tier ones, meaning like like the Fords, like I guess like your household name like OEMs, but a lot of like the breaks really happen at that tier two and like tier three level. And I guess Rich kind of touched on this, and like that's why capturing like the data is so important. And like the beauty about this is this isn't really doing anything particularly new and groundbreaking from people's process. What like we are just saying is, hey, people naturally generate a lot of data as they interact with their manufacturing supply chains. But the key then becomes, well, how do you leverage all of the data that you're currently generating as part of operating like your business and create that dynamic like that dynamic infrastructure that's more resilient to shocks at the component level.
Yeah, and one thing I like to add to that, and I think that's really well said. I think what's interesting is you have a macro level view of like a change in mindset and also a change in the need to be more dynamic. But you also have micro dynamics happening within manufacturers, where you have things like automation and robotics. You also have things like new manufacturing technologies, like additive manufacturing, is actually changing the cost parity equation, right? So, for example, when you looked at the 70s on, you had a need for low cost products, right? They were driving a pressure of manufacturing in like low cost countries like Southeast Asia, right? Like in China, like Vietnam, whatever have you, right? But with automation, that cost equation is actually changing to where it may actually make more sense from a landed cost perspective. When we say landed cost, is basically your material cost plus your fulfillment costs in terms of like shipping logistics. When you look at your full total landed cost, for some specific components, it actually makes more sense to manufacture locally, right? And when you also look at like new materials, they're more like sustainable, more bio-friendly, let's say recyclable materials are locally made or whatever have you, at their tier 3 level, you can actually use that in your manufacturing supply chain and still be very, very competitive. So you have a lot of like new capacity at a micro level that is coming out with new technology, and you have a macro shift that's going on. And that's why data and machine learning can be that kind of like that catalyst or that thing that gives a supply chain manager superpowers, right, to be able to do their job more effectively.
Yeah, and I think it's like that's super cool. I mean, that's exactly what you guys were saying. It was just uncertainty is the only certainty, and and whenever I talk to you all, it reminds me of just how much I don't know. And then when you think about it, making something,
and we are still figuring stuff out, Chris.
Yeah, but still, like with but just with reacting to things, like it's so clear that having a resource like Partsimony would be key to just surviving, it feels like today. Not even like just being successful, but like understanding and reacting to every crazy thing. Which leads me, you guys perfectly segue into the next question was just, as climate change ramps up and there's more and more natural disasters and change and quick pivots, what do you think are going to be some of like the successful characteristics of manufacturers and founders
it like really boils down to having like the core infrastructure to be adaptable and dynamic. Really, because we are now moving into like a paradigm when, again, like to your point, Chris, there is a lot of uncertainty, right? And so like the question then becomes, if you have two hardware companies, one has a more rigid approach to how they have their infrastructure set up, the other one has a more dynamic system, naturally the dynamic one is going to be more nimble than the one that's more rigid. And this could also level like the playing field from legacy hardware companies to like new up and coming companies. So it's really a very exciting time to like be alive. So yeah.
Yeah, and well, I'll just add to that. I'm not a big World War II buff or history buff. I do watch a lot of history documentaries. And when you look at one of the key reasons why the Allies won World War II is really around supply chain efficiencies, right? Getting the materials and resources to the battlefield faster, whatever have you. And if you use that analogy, like every company today, every hardware founder, you're at war. You're at war with competitors, you're at war with the market. Like you're trying to build fast and scale fast with a more cost-effective like capital structure, where you're not spending as much money as the next guy, where you're able to scale more and more products, right? And so for you to win this war in this new paradigm, you have to have, leverage your data that you're currently generating to give you that upper hand to win the overall war.
It's key. It's like funny. It's never like, and I feel like that's with any great issue. It's never, and it's the same thing with COVID. It's not like it's the problem wasn't, we're not solving this by some, yes, but some brainiac scientist inventing the vaccine. It's the logistics of getting a shot
actually getting it out. Yeah.
And that's it's like that was just as much as important as inventing the vaccine, if not more.
Exactly.
And so some of the things too is as you were talking about, kind of making it that bottom line and realizing some more of the cost efficient decisions are like local situations, and that depends on your industry and what you're doing. And kind of implementing more of these sustainable materials in the manufacturing. But something I keep running into, and I wanted to ask you guys this: do you see, like, for implementing some more of these sustainable solutions into manufacturing and supply chains, do you think it needs to start with the demand side or the supply side? And if it's both, do you think it's a split percentage or one on the other?
Yeah, I think it's something that's very, very important. First of all, right? And because of the level of importance, Roland and I really strongly believe it's 100% on both sides, right? Like both parties are responsible, because climate change, everything affects all of us. It doesn't just affect the manufacturer, it affects the demand side as well. And so the key is both parties need to take responsibility, but also a lot of times both parties need a nudge or some help to help them understand, here's the art of the possible. Right? You're doing this today. What can you do differently? It's not just sustainable, but also helps your bottom line, right? So especially in Partsimony, we try to do we try to give the carrot and not the stick of like, hey, look, it actually does make logical sense to be more sustainable, right? From just forget the brand perspective, whatever have you, just from an operations perspective, right? If you're able to use recycled products, like typically recycled materials are much cheaper, right? So it's like you can actually generate better economies of scale. So it really has to do with both parties stepping up, because it affects all of us today.
Thank you. I just, in so many different circles, I keep hearing people be like, well,
well, it's not really my.
Yeah, they're not buying it. It's not my job that they put plastic in that stuff. And you're like, well, it kind of is. You can. Awesome. Oh, I always love talking to you guys and catching up. And this kind of brings me to my last question, and which is a two-parter, and I'll start with Roland. But so one of the key questions that we do in the podcast is, how do you think that the landscape will look like in 10 years, and who do you think will be the key players?
We like frankly think that it is too early to tell. I mean, if like we had like the magic ball, we will all be like in Vegas now. But there are still like a few key players that are working on important challenges that like need to be solved. So we kind of touched on like the challenge on manufacturer discovery at the component level, like the challenge of design intent recommendations, the challenge of building that infrastructure to make you as an organization more adaptable, and all of these kind of key criteria. I think the key traits around who will probably win is, like the key players will have to be, one, really better for the ecosystem, not just for one party in general. And two, empower the people that they work with to be more resilient in their efforts.
Yeah, no, I think that was well said, Roland. I think what's interesting is in the past couple of decades, it's really been around like consolidating decision making, consolidating supply chains, whatever have you. And with these new technologies, things are going to be more fragmented, right? They're going to be more distributed in terms of, you might be able to just 3D print a part at home, right? This is the future, right? Like you can, what's a 3D print a replacement part, not have to have a manufacturer ship things to you that burns a lot of CO2, whatever have you. So again, I think like Roland mentioned, it's really going to be around collaboration, but also impact. I think impact will win out over just making profit.
I really hope so too.
And it turns out, yeah,
as well.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, and so part two of this question, and I think this is the most terrifying question, is where do you hope to be in 10 years within this landscape?
That's funny. Well, we hope to be alive. You know what? Like, I think so. Roland and I's mission with Partsimony is to improve the way physical products are made, right? To create a better future. That's really what our mission is to improve the way physical products are made to create a better future. So however that looks like, as long as we're marching towards that mission, I think we'll be happy.
Love it. That's awesome. Rich and Roland, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. It's I never feel like I have enough time with you two, and I'm very much looking forward to when things are, as things are opening up, we can maybe start meeting people in person again. But again,
I got my first vaccine dose.
Yo, same.
Nice.
Yeah. It's crazy. It's crazy to see. So, all right. Well, thank you all for listening. We'll see you next time. This has been, again, Rich and Roland with Partsimony. Check them out if you haven't already. If you want more on our podcast series, please go to forclimatetech.org. That's FOR climatetech.org. Rich and Roland, thank you again, and we'll see you all next time.